This is Kendall, and I am doing the adapted lesson plan for the Kendall case study. And how I would start this lesson off is I would take a small group of students mixed with high and low level performing students to a small circle table or half circle table, and we would start the lesson off by going over our academic language, which would be included in like glossary, index, for this specific lesson, because we're going to be talking about nonfiction text. We're going to go through those academic language definitions and show some examples. Specifically for Kendall, I will be giving her an illustrated vocabulary list. She does have ADHD and dyslexia, so going through that vocab auditory is going to be a little more difficult for her. She does have auditory processing difficulties as well as short-term memory. So she's going to be receiving a illustrated vocabulary list, very similar to this. And this is going to show her vocabulary word, a definition, and then a illustrated example for each academic language that we're going to be talking about. So in this case, since we're talking about nonfiction books, it's going to have a title, what nonfiction means, a timeline, glossary, label. I know it's backwards for you, but sidebar, bold text, things like that. It's going to show you a illustrated version of that. And for the other students, we're just going to be discussing them because we're going to go over it a lot more in detail through the lesson. So after we go through that the academic language, we're going to be showing the students the book they're going to be working with. And in the clip that I had watched for the case study, we were going over a nonfiction text about the Statue of Liberty. Unfortunately, I do not have that book, but I do have a nonfiction text. So we're going to use this as an example. I'm going to show the students the text that we're going to be working with, and I'm going to have each student guess whether they think it's a fiction or a nonfiction text. Now, each student's going to get a chance to guess, and then with that prediction, I'm going to ask them why they think it's either fiction or nonfiction. For Kendall specifically, when we get to her, and I ask her questions, I'm going to be making sure that I speak at a much slower rate because she does have auditory processing issue, that she's able to take that concept and understand it because of the auditory issues that she does have. So anytime that I speak to her, I'm going to be speaking much more clearly and making eye contact, making sure my mouth is not obstructed in her view, and that I give her plenty of time to respond to her answers. It gives her that time to really process it, because I know that if she has the time to process her thoughts, she might actually give me the correct answer or an honest answer rather than rushing through and just trying to speak. So that's what we're going to do. And then after we discuss whether they think it's going to be a nonfiction or fiction text, I will tell them we're going to be working with nonfiction text. So then after that, we're going to put the book aside. We're going to take out our writer's notebooks. On the left-hand side, I'm going to have the students write what I know. And then on the right side, they're going to be writing questions. So on that left-hand side, what I know, students are going to be writing down facts or topics that they know about that. So in this case, like I said, it was Statue of Liberty. So they're going to be writing 3 facts that they already know prior to reading about the Statue of Liberty, and then 3 questions that they want to know or that they think will help them in their learning of the Statue of Liberty. And then after we write that down, we're going to go into the I do section where I model what we're going to be doing. And before I do that, the materials that we're going to be using for the entire lesson are going to be the nonfiction text. So again, that was the Statue of Liberty book. And each student is going to be given their own anchor chart for nonfiction. and it's gonna look something similar to this. So it's gonna have the academic language, so table of contents, glossary, index, and then it's gonna have a definition of each one, as well as an example of what that looks like. So every student in our small group is going to be receiving one of those. And then specifically for Kendall, she's going to receive that as well, but she's going to have her illustrated vocabulary so that she can really see that, put that auditory and visual to use. So that's going to be the materials. Specifically, Kendall also is going to be working with a laptop, and to do that, she's going to be using an audio version of the book, as well as a speech-to-text software, because she does have dyslexia. So speech-to-text is really going to help her formulate those words rather than worry about writing them down, because we're really focusing on the concepts and the content that she understands and that she knows, rather than seeing it written down. So she's going to be using that. So those are the two materials that are special to her for her adaptations and modifications. But for the rest of the group, they're going to be working with their book and their anchor chart. And so as we move on in our activity, we're going to be doing the I do section, and that's where specifically I'll be modeling what we're going to be doing. And first I'm going to ask questions about kind of what they know already and what they want to know and things like that. But I'm going to then be doing my own anchor chart. So what I'm going to do is have students flip the anchor chart that I gave them over. So once they do that, because I don't really want them just verbatim telling me what's on this chart, so I'm going to flip that over and tell students they can, however, use their text to answer those questions. So I'm going to start off with, on the board behind me, I'm going to write down a table of contents, a glossary, index, and I want this my students to answer kind of what that means, where they think that is, things like that, that we're going to talk about. So they open their books. If they want to use that as a reference, we're going to start with a table of contents. So I'm going to be writing that on the board behind me. I'm going to ask them, do they think it's at the front of the book, the back of the book? So with the table of contents, it is in the front of the book. And then I'm going to be asking, does it have page numbers? Does it not have page numbers? What are the words that in the table of contents? So I'm really looking for students to be understanding the differences between like index and table of contents. So with contents, we're going to be seeing that it's mostly names of chapter headings and just sections of the text. It's not really words. And it does have page numbers. So we're going to be writing that down. It's in the front of the book. It is names of headings or chapter titles, and it has page numbers. So then we're going to move on to our glossary, and I'll ask students where they think that is. So we're going to be going through our text to find the glossary. And, well, it is at the back of the book. So we're going to write that down on our anchor chart, back of the book. I'm going to ask students, is it alphabetical or is it by page number? And we find out that it is alphabetical and what it is. So it's basically giving definitions of the word. And again, if students really aren't understanding the concepts, I'm not going to tell it to them. I'm going to kind of guide them with questions. So I'll ask them, what do you see in the glossary? I see words. Okay, well, what is the word? What is the words after? What is it telling me? Oh, it's telling me a definition. That makes sense. So we're going to be writing it down like that. And then finally, we get to index, which is at the back of the book. So we write that down. And I see page numbers. So we'd write that down. And what are all these words? So we're going to go through and talk about what are all the words in the index. So the words are all the words and the concepts that are going to be in the book. So I see Statue of Liberty, I see copper, I see France, or anything that really has like a relationship with that topic. We're going to be able to find in the index and the page number that we can find it. So again, students are going to be exploring their own books to help me write down my anchor chart. And so with Kendall specifically, like I said, when I speak to her, I'm definitely going to be speaking at a much slower rate and focusing eye contact with her so that she knows that I'm talking to her and she has plenty of time to process that question. But we also, as a small group, are going to be participating in Class Dojo, which is one of the fun little activities that I like to do with my students. So what that is it's going to be on the smartboard behind me, and it shows a visual track of points that are rewarded based on behavior or class performance or participation, staying on task, things like that they're going to be awarded points for if they are doing. So prior to the activity, where we would definitely be going over our class expectations and rules, and they are also posted in our classroom. Students are well aware of them, but it's nice to have a visual reminder of those class expectations. So what's nice about Class Dojo is as you go through the activity, if you've noticed a student is actively participating and you'd like to award them points, it's visual. So everybody in the group can see it and see what they've been awarded points for, kind of engaging students and encouraging them to actively participate as well for those points. Now, when we are finished, points are able to be traded in for prizes. So that really is an incentive to actively participate and stay on task. Now with Kendall specifically, she does have a history of behavior incidents in the classroom. So, and also staying on task with her ADHD. So with having that visual reminder constantly of the expectations, I think it's really going to be a really good tool, useful for her. So then after the I do section, we move on to we do. So that's where we're going to do it together as a small group, and it's going to be our guided book walk. So students are welcome to flip over their little anchor chart, as well as refer to the anchor chart that we've just done that I've just done for them. And so what we're really going to do is we're not going to be reading it yet. This is just a guided book walk. So I want them to really focus on the parts and content of specifically a nonfiction text. And so what's different that you don't generally get in, say, a picture book or a chapter book, like that they're not used to, and that are really specific to a nonfiction text. Now, obviously, my students know that this is the front cover, the spine, title page, author, illustrator, those kinds of aspects. But that's kind of in all books. So we're really specifically focusing on nonfiction text. So I'm going to have my students open up and walk with me as we go through each page. And we're going to see the title page. Okay. Wow, look at that. We've gotten to the table of contents. So once we're on the table of contents, we're going to be looking and seeing, I see part 1. I see a name of the heading, and then I see a page number. So if we follow that page number 7 to page number 7, we're going to see that name matches that name. And it's going to match because that's telling us that if we want to go to that chapter heading, that's where it is. So we're going to be going through and just kind of practicing it like that together. Ask questions along the way. Be like, what is on page 5? And they can tell me. So that way I'm really actively listening to make sure that they are understanding what the purpose of the table of contents is and how to use it. Then we're going to move on. Well, first, before we move on, we're going to double check that what we wrote down on our anchor chart is actually correct. So, yeah, it is at the front of the book. It does have page numbers, and it tells me the chapter or the heading names. Perfect. That's what we wrote down. And then we're going to be moving on. And as we go through pages, I'm going to be pointing out bold text, graphs, charts, timelines, dates, things like that aren't in fiction texts. If we have an illustration, I'm going to be looking for labels, pointing. So as we go through, we're going to be looking to see when we get to the glossary. So as we go through and we see the glossary, we're going to be talking about, it says glossary at the top, it says a name or a word, and then after the word, it has a definition. So I'm going to be looking at that and seeing that that is our glossary, and refer back to our anchor chart. It is at the back of the book. Check. Tells the meaning or the definition of a word. Check. And it's alphabetical, right? It's not by page number. It is alphabetical. They go in alphabetical order. That helps us to find our words quickly. Check. All right. Then we are going to move on to our index. So index, again, it's at the back of the book. Check. It is alphabetical. Check. And it has page numbers. So it tells us where to find that word. So for instance, if we were doing Statue of Liberty, we're going to be looking for, maybe we remember hearing the word France, but we didn't know why or where it was. So we're going to be looking for F, perfect, and France. Once we find France, we'll see that France is on page 7. So then we go back to page 7, and boom, there's France. And that's kind of what an index is used for. And then I'll be quizzing students. I'll say, who can find copper? And they'll go to C, find copper, and we'll just practice a couple times. And so that's really what I want to focus on our guided book walk is practice using it, practice on how to use it, the functions, the features, how to use our anchor chart to refer back to it. And that's what we're going to be discussing on the We Do section of our lesson, is our guided book walk. So once we move on from that, we're going to do You Do. And that's where the students are independently doing their own work. So what I want students to start with is they're going to write down, so earlier in the lesson, in our writer's notebooks, we wrote down what I know and our questions. So I'm going to first start on what I know. So we have not read the book yet. We just kind of skimmed through and did our guided book walk, but we have not actually read it. So we don't know everything yet, but I do want to get a feel for what students already know. So we're going to write down 3 concepts, topics, or facts that we already know about the Statue of Liberty. I'm going to give them ample time to do that. Now, specifically with Kendall, because she does have the auditory processing and dyslexia, ADHD, that she's going to need more time, but I don't want to slow down the rest of the group. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having her write 3, I'm going to be asking her to write 1. And that gives her the time that everybody else has, all her peers have for 3, she's going to have for 1. So it does give her that extra time. Now, she is going to be using her speech-to-text software to focus on her content knowledge rather than her writing, reading, and like that. So it's really going to be able to be a help for her to focus on specifically the content that she does know, rather than worrying about how to write it or spell words, things like that she might struggle with. After they've written down the 3 things that they know, we're going to go into the 3 questions we'd like to know. Things that maybe we think will help us in our learning, or to help us understand that content better. What could help us understand that better? And I'm going to give them time for that as well. She, again, will only need to do 1. Now, if she does finish the 1 with plenty of time, she's certainly welcome to do 2 and 3. It's just I'm requiring her to do at least the 1. She does do better in small chunks rather than a whole. In her case study, it mentioned that she does work better that way. So that's also helping her to focus on that small content rather than the whole picture. So really focus on 1 at a time. After the students finish that, it is now independent reading. So students are going to take that book and they're going to read their nonfiction text about the Statue of Liberty. And Kendall specifically will have access to the audio version if she would like, and she can put it on her headphones and follow along with that text as they read it to her. With her dyslexia, mainly want to focus on the content that she's understanding and she's reading. But if she's not reading it well, she might not be understanding the content. So we really want to make sure she understands it, and the audiobook will help her do that. So finally, after we've done the reading, we're going to get back together. Everyone's going to close their books, and we're going to close with 3 ways to utilize a nonfiction text. And again, when I ask Kendall questions, I'm really looking for a verbal answer. I'm not going to ask her to write anything down. I want to make sure she understands that concept, and the supports that all students are going to be getting are the anchor charts. So there's independent anchor chart, as well as the one that I did in the beginning of the activity, as well as a small group. So with whole group instruction, it is a lot different of an atmosphere. Everyone is expected to be quiet at all times, raise their hands, those classroom expectations. But with a small group, it's a lot more close and intimate, and that students are required to, yes, raise their hand when somebody is speaking, but they're able to kind of ask questions more freely, have more time to understand the content, and if they have questions, that we can go through them. Now, expectation students are always expected to use their eyes and ears to listen to someone who is speaking. But again, it is more of a close situation, so they're getting more out of it with a small group. And specifically, Kendall's support is her illustrated vocabulary, as well as sitting next to that high-level peer. She works better with peers in her case study. So sitting her next to a high-level peer is going to encourage her to work harder, as well as mirror the way that the peer is working, and to use the peer's work as an example if she has any questions. So that's going to be her supports as well. And for my assessment, we're going to be using those writers' notebooks. So I'll be able to assess what they wrote for the 3 topics that they know already, and the 3 questions that they want to know. That will help me understand where they're at knowledge-wise with the content. And for Kendall, I'll have it on her computer on a Word document, and it'll tell me what she knows already. And so for my assessment of how I'll know if they've met that goal is I would like to see for my students 3 questions 3 topics that they already know, 3 questions that they would like to know, and I'm going to ask them to point out 1 feature specific to a nonfiction text, whether that be index, glossary, table of contents, things like that. I want to see them if they know specifically to nonfiction, and then they're going to find it in the book for me. Now, for Kendall, she's only going to be required to do 1 topic that she knows, 1 question that she would like to know, and she is going to be asked to name a feature of a nonfiction text, as well as find it within the text. So it is a modified goal for her, but similar to her peers. And again, anytime I'm speaking to Kendall, it's going to be slower, and I'm going to ask for verbal responses rather than written. And that is the activity in the whole. And those are my assessments, modifications, and strategies that I think that will help Kendall boost her learning, success, and understanding of the content. Thank you.